December 30th, 1936. Flint, Michigan. General Motors Plant Number 4. A worker named Walt Moore quietly raised his hand. The conveyor belt stopped. Nobody walked out. Nobody chanted. Nobody held a sign. 46,000 workers sat down on the factory floor and refused to leave. 44 days later, General Motors signed something it had sworn it would never sign. But to understand how that became possible, the story doesn't start in December. It starts 4 years earlier, 1932. Flint, Michigan, 6:47 a.m. Walt Moore's wage was $4.20 per day, 10 hours on the assembly line. Speed set not by the workers, but by a manager named Dillon with a stopwatch. That Friday, Dillon called the crew together at the end of the shift. Starting next week, line speed increases by 8%. Management has made the decision. Walt raised his hand. Dillon looked at him the way people look at a dog that has done something unexpected. What? If speed goes up 8%, we need 2 more men on this section. Otherwise, we physically can't keep up. Dillon closed his notepad. No additional men. Work faster. The following week, 2 workers were injured. One broke his wrist, one dislocated his shoulder, because the line didn't wait for you to catch a bolt already rolling across the floor. The company covered 1 doctor's visit each, deducted from wages. Walt walked home through the snow thinking this was not the way things should work. But he didn't yet know what to do about it. Summer, 1933. Detroit. A bar on Michigan Avenue. Walt sat across from a man named Victor Ruther. "You understand the problem with strikes," Ruther said. "Not a question. Tell me." The worker walks out, and the company hires another one, always. You stand outside with your sign, and inside, someone else is already working. That's not a fight. That's a request. So what's a fight? Ruther smiled. Not warmly. You occupy the plant from the inside. You sit down on the floor and say, "We are not leaving. They can't hire anyone else because we are inside. They can't run the line because we are sitting on it. They can't send the police in by force because that means destroying their own equipment. And they have no option left except negotiation." Walt looked at him for a long moment. Nobody has ever done that in America. They did it in France, 1934. It worked. Time to do it here. From 1933 to 1936, Walt Moore worked, clocked in at 7, turned bolts, went home. But something was changing. Very slowly, almost invisibly. Walt talked to people, not at meetings, not at rallies, at lunch, in the locker room, walking to the parking lot on Friday evenings. He didn't organize. He didn't give speeches. He asked questions. They speed up your section too? Your back hurt after the shift? How long you been here, Joe? 13 years. And you've never gotten a raise? People answered. Then they started asking their own questions. The company ran informants on every floor. Workers paid a little more to report names and conversations. The system had worked for 20 years. They've never fired you, Ruther noted in 35. 3 years of conversations. How? Walt shrugged. I never say anything first. I only respond to what people say on their own. An informant can report an organizer, but he can't report a man who agreed that his back hurts. You know exactly what you're doing. I'm waiting, said Walt, for the right moment. December, 1936. General Motors announced record profits, $228 million, the most successful year in the company's history. That same month, the company announced wage cuts, operational optimization. Walt read the announcement on the locker room board. Next to him stood an older worker named Sam, 21 years at the plant. $228 million profit, Sam said quietly, and they're cutting our pay. Walt didn't answer. That evening he called Ruther. The moment is here. When? December 30th, 5 minutes past noon. You're sure the men are ready? They've been ready for 3 years. They just don't know it yet. The morning of December 30th was ordinary. Snow, 7 a.m., the line. At 12:58, Walt raised his hand. That was the signal. Not a word, not a shout, just a hand. Joe saw it. Nodded to Henry. Henry nodded to Mike. Mike nodded to the men at the next section. At 1 p.m., the conveyor was supposed to restart. The workers didn't stand up. They sat on the floor, in silence. Dillon appeared 4 minutes later, red-faced, stopwatch in hand. What is this? Get up right now. You know you're all going to be fired. Nobody answered. Nobody moved. By 2 o'clock, the plant's assistant director walked in, tie, overcoat, pulled from some meeting. Who is in charge here? Silence. Walt raised his head. Nobody is in charge here. We are all in charge. You have occupied private property. We're sitting on the floor, at our workstations, during working hours. This isn't an occupation. It's a shift without movement. By evening, workers in 3 more sections had sat down. Nobody slept properly the first night. Workers arranged themselves on machinery, on pallets, in the cabs of unfinished cars on the conveyor. Wives passed food through the fence in large pots. Walt sat against the wall with cold coffee. Joe Kowalski settled next to him. You scared? Joe asked. Yeah, but less than another 20 years of this. On the second day, the company shut off the heat. Workers burned wooden crates on the factory floor and crowded around the fire. Nobody left. On the third day, the company shut off the water. January 11th. Michigan Governor Murphy received a call from the president of General Motors demanding he send in the National Guard. Murphy thought, if he sent troops, blood would be spilled, people would die, his career would end. But if he didn't, the company would lose millions every day until they sat down to negotiate. Murphy put down the phone. He didn't send the troops. That night, a police unit tried to enter the plant anyway. Workers had no weapons, but they had fire hoses connected to the plant's water system, and it was January. When the officers pushed through the side gate, they were hit with a wall of ice-cold water. -14 outside. They retreated in 10 minutes, soaking wet, coated in ice, photographed by reporters that Ruther had tipped off the night before. The photographs ran in papers across the country. Workers at plants in Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin declared their support. January 18th. A conference room in Flint's City Hall. The company's vice president opened, "We are prepared to discuss the terms of ending this unlawful action." Ruther opened his folder. "We're not discussing the terms of ending anything. We're discussing the terms of an agreement. Those are different things. You have no leverage. A court will issue an eviction order within a week. Every day of shutdown costs your company $1 million. You're at 22 days. A wrongful strike lawsuit means 3 more years of litigation. By then, your competitors have taken the market share you're losing right now. Or we settle today, and next week, the line is running again." Silence. "What do you want?" Walt placed a single sheet of paper on the table. Recognition of the union. Mandatory negotiations on working conditions. No unilateral line speed increases. And reinstatement of workers fired for participation in this action. You understand that this sets a precedent for the entire industry. Yes, said Walt. That's exactly what we mean. February 11th, 1937. Walt Moore stood at the exit of Plant Number 4. General Motors had signed the agreement the evening before. Union recognition, mandatory bargaining, no unilateral speed increases, reinstatement of fired workers. For the first time in the history of the largest automobile company in America, several thousand people stood outside. Wives, children, workers from other plants, journalists. Applause started. A few people at first, then more and more, until it seemed like the whole city of Flint was clapping at once. Joe Kowalski stood next to Walt, shoulder to shoulder. What now? Walt looked at the plant. The stacks were still smoking. The conveyor was ready to start again, under different terms. Now we go back to work, he said. And they did. By the end of 1937, the United Auto Workers had grown from 30,000 members to 500,000. Ford, Chrysler, U.S. Steel, one by one, they signed. Not because they wanted to, because they understood that refusing meant your workers sitting down on the floor, and there was nothing you could do about it. The official documents call it the Flint Sit-Down Strike. History books describe it as a pivotal moment in American labor law. But the people who were inside told their children something different. They told them about how one man raised his hand, and thousands understood it as a signal, because they had spent 3 years quietly getting ready. About how nobody threw a bomb, nobody fired a shot. They just sat down on the floor and refused to get up. Walt Moore's grandson recalled that his grandfather used to repeat one phrase, not at rallies, at the dinner table. Power isn't in breaking the machine. Power is in simply refusing to start it. They can't do anything to a man who just sits, because you can go to prison for an action, not for inaction. Inaction is their weakness, not yours. That was the formula General Motors hadn't anticipated, couldn't answer in 44 days, and that every company in American industry learned by heart after Flint. Sometimes the most powerful move is to stop,